The envelope that changed everything was a quiet morning in Chennai. The monsoon clouds lingered above, casting a soft gray light over the modest home where Lakshmi Pichai lived. The breeze carried with it the smell of wet earth and the distant cries of street vendors. Inside her home, Lakshmi, a graceful elderly woman dressed in a simple cotton sari, was watering her small row of tulsi plants. She had lived here for decades. The walls knew her stories, her quiet prayers, and her laughter. She didn't seek luxury. Her joy came from simple things, her garden, her temple visits, and the phone calls from her son, Sundar. He called her every day, no matter where he was. Sometimes from Silicon Valley, sometimes from European airports, and sometimes just before stepping onto a stage with world leaders. But to Lakshmi, he was simply her son. It's not the CEO of Google, not a tech genius. It's just her boy who once ran barefoot across these very streets with a head full of dreams. That morning, as she prepared to boil milk for her morning tea, there was a knock at the door. Not a usual knock, not the tap-tap of the postman or the sing-song call of the flower seller. This was firm, deliberate. She opened the door to see a man in a crisp uniform standing tall with a golden-bordered envelope in his hand. His eyes scanned her with a respectful nod. "Mrs. Lakshmi Pichai?" he asked softly. She blinked, surprised. "Yes, that's me." He handed her the envelope with a small bow, from the office of the Prime Minister. She stared at it, confused. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted it. The man nodded again, turned, and left without another word. Lakshmi slowly closed the door behind her, her heart beating faster than it had in years. She stared at the seal on the envelope, the deep red wax with the national emblem pressed into it. She sat on the edge of the wooden chair, carefully breaking the seal. The letter inside was formal, typed in neat lines. She read it once, then again, then a third time, slower, as if her mind refused to believe the words. She was being invited to an exclusive event in Delhi by Prime Minister Modi himself, not Sundar, not any official. Her. The invitation wasn't for a tech conference. It wasn't about innovation or business. It was a cultural celebration to honor women who had quietly shaped the nation in their own way. Women whose values had rippled across generations, creating men and women who changed the world. And one of them was Sundar Pichai's mother. Lakshmi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She folded the letter slowly and held it to her chest. It wasn't the honor or the grandeur that moved her. It was that someone, somewhere had seen her, not just as the mother of a successful man, but as a woman with her own story. Later that evening, she called Sundar. He answered with his usual warmth. "Did you get the envelope?" She was quiet for a second. "You knew?" He chuckled gently. "Modi ji called me last week, said he wanted to invite someone special, someone who shaped me." Lakshmi's voice trembled. "But I've done nothing. I didn't even finish school." Sundar said, his voice thick with emotion. "You taught me more than any school ever did. You taught me humility. You taught me how to treat people. You gave me strength when I had none." There was silence. Then he added, "This is your moment." Lakshmi agreed to go, though a part of her felt nervous. She had never been to a political event. She had never worn anything fancier than a silk sari for weddings. But Sundar promised he would be there too, not as a speaker, but as a son. He'd fly in from California just for her. The days passed quickly. She packed a small suitcase with 2 saris, some jewelry, and a worn photograph of her husband who had passed years ago. She whispered to it, "We're going to Delhi, you and I." At the Delhi airport, she stepped out to a sight that left her breathless. Men in suits, black cars with flags, photographers flashing their cameras. Someone guided her to a sleek black car with tinted windows. She had never sat in such a car before. The seats felt like clouds. The driver offered her water, but she only smiled politely, too overwhelmed to drink. When she arrived at the government guest house, she found her name on a golden plaque at the entrance. Inside, fresh flowers greeted her, and a staff member handed her a personalized itinerary. She read it, stunned. She was listed as a guest of honor. Her speech was scheduled just after the Minister of Culture. That night, she sat alone on the balcony, staring at the stars. Sundar arrived just before midnight. She opened the door and saw her son in a black jacket, a little tired but beaming. They hugged silently. No words were needed. He rested his head on her shoulder for a moment, like he used to when he was a boy. The next morning, Lakshmi wore her pink sari, one that Sundar had gifted her from Benares. She braided jasmine into her hair. Her hands trembled slightly as she added a simple bindi on her forehead. She looked into the mirror and barely recognized herself. But when Sundar entered the room and saw her, his eyes filled with tears. "Amma," he whispered, "you look like a queen." At the venue, the crowd buzzed with anticipation. Leaders, artists, and media personalities were seated in rows. Cameras lined the stage. And then, with a soft chime, the Prime Minister entered. Everyone stood. Modi ji walked with calm dignity, his eyes scanning the room. He stepped onto the stage and began to speak. He spoke about mothers, about women behind the scenes, about strength that doesn't shout but shapes silently. Then, with a pause, he said, "And today, I want to invite someone who reminds us of what true power looks like. Not the kind that controls, but the kind that nurtures." He looked straight at Lakshmi. "Mrs. Lakshmi, Pichai, please join me." The crowd turned. Lakshmi froze. Sundar gently touched her shoulder. She stood slowly, her knees shaky, but her spine straight. As she walked to the stage, time slowed. People whispered. Some clapped. "Ah!" A few wiped their eyes. As she reached Modi ji, he folded his hands in a respectful namaste. She returned the gesture. He handed her a small plaque. It read, "For shaping a mind that shaped the world." Lakshmi looked at it, her lips trembling, and then she took the microphone. She didn't prepare a speech. She never liked speeches. But she spoke from her heart. "I am not educated," she began. "I only know how to love. I taught my son to respect people, to listen, to stay grounded. I never thought anyone would thank me for that." There was silence. But today I feel seen. People stood. A standing ovation. Sundar wiped his eyes. Even Modi ji looked moved, and just as Lakshmi stepped down from the stage, a man in the crowd shouted something that no one expected. "She's not the only one who deserves to be honored." The room went silent. Heads turned. Lakshmi froze. Sundar looked confused. Modi ji raised his hand gently, motioning the man to continue, and what he said next changed everything. The voice in the crowd, the air in the grand hall turned still, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. The voice that had called out moments ago echoed in everyone's minds, pulling attention away from the stage and turning it toward a single man standing in the third row. He wore a pale blue shirt, slightly wrinkled, with a name tag that identified him as a delegate from a rural education trust in Gujarat. His eyes were fierce but kind, his tone not defiant but urgent. And even as the Prime Minister and Sundar, Pichai turned to face him. The man didn't shrink from the spotlight. "She's not the only one who deserves to be honored," he repeated, voice steadier now. "We all talk about great leaders, great minds, but there's someone else in this room who deserves our gratitude." Lakshmi stood frozen near the steps of the stage, the plaque still in her hands. Her heart raced, not from fear but from confusion. Her eyes scanned the crowd, unsure of who the man was or why he had spoken. Nado looked at Modi ji, silently asking if this was expected. Modi ji nodded subtly, and the man continued. "Annie! Years ago I was a school teacher in a small town near Madara. We had no computers, no funds, no electricity some nights. One day we received a package. No letter, no explanation. It was a set of second-hand laptops, shipped to our school with love and care. Inside, one note written in Tamil, "Every child deserves a window to the world." He paused, letting the words settle. We later found out it was sent anonymously. But a friend recognized the handwriting. It matched a letter she had once seen from Mrs. Lakshmi Pichai. She did this before her son became famous. Gasps whispered across the hall. Cameras panned in, and murmurs stirred among the guests. Sundar turned to his mother, stunned. Even he didn't know. Lakshmi looked down at her hands. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "I didn't think anyone would remember that." The man smiled gently. "You didn't want anyone to, but you planted seeds. And those seeds changed lives." One of those laptops sparked a young girl's love for coding. She now works at NASA. Modi ji stepped forward again. "This is what I mean when I say real power is silent. This is a mother's legacy." The hall erupted in applause again. But this time, it was layered with something deeper: respect, realization, and reflection. Sundar gently took his mother's hand and led her down the stage steps. His eyes still glassy with emotion, they sat together in the front row. For a while, the event continued. More honorees, more speeches, but for Lakshmi, the world had already shifted. She had come thinking she was merely attending for her son's sake. Now, the nation was acknowledging her quiet acts of kindness that even her own son hadn't known. That night, in the government guest house, Sundar and Lakshmi sat on a balcony that overlooked the city skyline. The bright lights stretched endlessly, blinking like stars. Sundar had poured them both a cup of warm milk with cardamom, just like she used to make for him when he stayed up late studying. He turned to her with a softness rare in powerful men. "Amma," he began, "why didn't you tell me about the laptops?" Lakshmi smiled, her eyes crinkling with wisdom. "What matters is that the children used them, not who sent them." Sundar shook his head gently. "You taught me how to build. But more than that, you taught me why." She touched his face lightly. "I only gave what I had. You gave the world something bigger." He looked away, swallowing his emotion. "Do you know how often I'm told that I'm humble? That I listen more than I speak? It's all you, Amma. Every boardroom, every interview, every challenge I face, I hear your voice reminding me be kind. Stay rooted." The moment lingered in the cool night air. The weight of gratitude sat heavy in his chest, too big for words. But Lakshmi only smiled. She wasn't seeking praise. She had lived her life without expecting acknowledgement. And perhaps that's what made her legacy even more powerful. But the trip wasn't over yet. The next day, they were invited to a private luncheon hosted by the Prime Minister at his residence. It was meant to be intimate, just a handful of guests. As they stepped into the serene compound, Lakshmi's eyes widened. It wasn't the grandeur or the marble flooring. It was the warmth. The space felt lived in. Human Modi ji greeted them personally. He bowed slightly toward Lakshmi. "APC's Sanskar say hi desh banta hai," he said gently. "It's from your values that the nation is shaped." She folded her hands and smiled. "I only did my duty." As they sat down for lunch, Lakshmi was seated beside Modi ji and Sundar, a seat away. The conversation was simple. They spoke of family, of traditions, of food. Lakshmi even shared a few recipes that the Prime Minister's chef eagerly noted down. But as the meal ended, Modi ji's tone shifted. He looked at Sundar seriously. "There's something else I must tell you. Something that may surprise you." Sundar leaned in, curious. "Your name came up when we discussed keynote speakers for our Global Innovation Forum next quarter," Modi ji said. "Naturally, everyone expected we'd invite you." Sundar nodded, expecting nothing less, but I said no. The room fell silent. Sundar froze, unsure how to respond. Lakshmi's brow furrowed slightly. Modi ji continued. "Wanted to do something different. I said we'd invite your mother instead." Sundar blinked. "My mother." Modi ji nodded, because innovation is not just code and machines. It's mindset, values, roots. Your mother represents the foundation of your success. The world has heard enough from leaders. Now it's time they hear from those who shaped them. Lakshmi's eyes widened. "Sir, I'm not a speaker. I'm just a mother." Modi ji smiled. "And that's exactly why you must speak." The weight of the moment crashed over Sundar like a wave. It wasn't rejection, it was revolution. For once the spotlight would turn away from the famous and shine on the silent strength behind them. Later, in their guest room, Sundar paced. The floor, double quotes, AMMA? Are you sure you want to do this? He asked, his voice anxious. Lakshmi nodded slowly. I'm not afraid of speaking. I'm only afraid of forgetting to breathe. He laughed through the lump in his throat. We'll write it together. Every word. They spent the next 2 days writing. Sundar typed. Lakshmi spoke. She told stories from her youth, of growing up with 5 siblings and 1 oil lamp, of walking miles for school, only to be pulled back home for chores, marrying young, building a life from nothing, raising 2 boys with just values and prayers. She spoke of moments teaching Sundar to ask before interrupting, insisting he'd say thank you even when no one noticed, reminding him that kindness is more important than cleverness. When the speech was done, Sundar looked at the screen and whispered, "This is the most important thing I've ever written." They rehearsed every night. Lakshmi's voice shook at first, but slowly grew steadier. She wasn't trying to impress. She was trying to connect. But as the day of the Global Innovation Forum approached, a letter arrived at the guest house. Small envelope, unmarked. It was slid under the door late at night. Sundar picked it up, opened it, and read silently. His face turned pale. Lakshmi looked up. What is it, Kana? Oh. He handed her the letter. Inside was a message written in bold. Black ink. Do not let her speak. Stage is not for simple women. The note was unsigned. And just like that, everything changed again. The note that tried to silence Hearth's words in the letter lay heavy on the table, like a shadow creeping over something sacred. Sundar stared at it, his jaw clenched tight, fingers trembling as he reached for the piece of paper again.
Lakshmi,
sitting just across from him, didn't blink. Her eyes traced the message once more, her face unreadable. Do not let her speak. This stage is not for simple women. There was no signature, no return address, just those 10 words written in thick, cold ink. For a moment, silence hung in the air like fog. Even the sounds from the street outside, honking horns, children's laughter. The whistle of a passing train felt distant, muffled, as if the world had momentarily stepped away to give them space. Someone is threatened, Sundar finally said, voice low and sharp. Someone knows what your words can do. Lakshmi looked up at him, her eyes calm but firm. Or maybe, she said softly, they just don't want people to see what strength really looks like. He wanted to call security. He wanted to tell the organizers to involve officials to make sure this cowardly threat was crushed under protocol and protection. But Lakshmi reached out and placed her hand over his. No, Kana, we won't give them power. Not by reacting, not by retreating. Amma, let them try to silence me, she said. But I have already been silent most of my life. Not anymore. There was something in her voice that reminded him of a time long ago, when their electricity had been cut off for weeks, and he had studied by candlelight while she sewed blouses late into the night. She had said nothing then, but her silence had been full of strength, and now her words carried the same. Still, Sundar couldn't shake the unease. He called one of the organizers, subtly mentioning the note without giving too many details. Security was increased discreetly. Surveillance was tightened. But they agreed with Lakshmi would not stop the speech. It must not. The day of the Global Innovation Forum arrived with a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation. Lakshmi, dressed in a deep green sari with a golden border, gifted to her by Sundar many years ago, but never worn. Her hair was neatly braided, jasmine freshly tucked into it. Her hands trembled slightly as she fastened her earrings, but her eyes in the mirror were steady. Sundar knocked and stepped in. He paused for a moment when he saw her. "Ha," he whispered, "you look ... powerful." She smiled, her lips twitching only because of who stands beside me. The venue was unlike anything she had seen before. A massive auditorium glowing with soft lights, and a giant screen behind the stage displaying her name. Yes, her name, not her son's. Not a tech leader's. Hers, as they walked through the backstage corridor. Some of the world's most influential. People passed by, CEOs, ministers, tech pioneers, but each one paused to look at her. Some smiled, some nodded, and a few simply stared, surprised to see such dignity in someone so unassuming. They reached the waiting area behind the stage. A young assistant approached them with 2 wireless mics. One for Sundar, one for Lakshmi. We're ready when you are, ma'am, he said politely. Lakshmi took the mic and turned it over in her hands like she was holding something sacred. I never thought I'd hold one of these. Sundar stood beside her, breathing deeply. Are you nervous? Not nervous, she said. Just ... Ready? The MC on stage announced her name. Applause rippled through the audience. Lakshmi stepped forward, her son walking a few steps behind. The light hit her face, and for a moment, the crowd saw not just an elderly woman, but the quiet force that had shaped one of the world's greatest minds. She walked up to the podium slowly, adjusted the mic, and looked out at the thousands of eyes watching her. The silence was vast, respectful, and then she began. I've never spoken in a room like this before, she said. I've never used a microphone or stood on a stage, but I have spent my life shaping a world that now speaks through my son. Her voice was soft, but steady. The room leaned in. I come from a small home. We had one fan, one stove, one dream: to raise children who would make the world a little kinder. When Sundar was born, I didn't know he would lead Google. I only knew I wanted him to respect people, to treat others as equals, and to listen. A murmur of approval moved through the crowd. Some people believe greatness is in achievements. I believe it is in values, and how we speak to those who can do nothing for us, and how we carry ourselves when no one is watching. Her speech was simple, but in its simplicity lay power. She spoke of raising her sons, of surviving on little, of keeping hope alive when life gave no reason to. I gave Sundar a notebook. When he was a child, she said, I told him, write down ideas, but also write down moments when you made someone smile. Both are important. By the time she reached the end, many in the crowd were wiping their eyes. Even seasoned journalists, used to world leaders and eloquent speeches, were moved by the authenticity that poured from her. She looked directly into the camera. To the women watching this, your strength matters. Even if no one sees it, even if no one thanks you. The seeds you plant today, will grow into forests tomorrow. Applause erupted, standing ovation. The room lit up with emotion. Some delegates cheered, some cried, some simply stood in silence. Hand over heart, Sundar joined her on stage. He didn't say a word, just hugged her tightly, like a boy who had just seen the hero of his life get her moment in the sun. They walked off the stage together, but behind the curtains, as they returned to the green room, a man stood waiting. Security recognized him instantly and stepped in, but Sundar held up his hand. No, he said. Let him speak. The man looked nervous, almost ashamed. Wore a formal suit, but his hands were sweaty, his eyes darting. His hand was another note, this time not anonymous. He stepped forward and handed it to Lakshmi. I wrote the threat, he said quietly, and I need to explain why. Sundar moved protectively, but Lakshmi placed a calming hand on his arm. The man took a breath. I'm from a private tech group that's been trying to dominate government contracts for years. When we heard you would be speaking, we worried it would shift attention away from our pitches. We thought, if the story became too emotional, too human, it would destroy our advantage. He looked at the ground, ashamed. But I was wrong. Your words didn't weaken the message of innovation. They made it stronger. We build machines. Yes, but you, ... you build minds. Lakshmi looked at him not with anger, but quiet sadness. Fear makes people do foolish things, she said, but there's still time to build something better. The man nodded slowly, speechless. Sundar didn't say a word. He just watched his mother, this woman who had once fought for a child's school. Fees with borrowed money now, teaching a man worth millions about ethics. But just when they thought the moment was over, another assistant rushed in. Mr. Pichai, he said, out of breath, you need to see this. It's trending worldwide. They opened the screen. On every major platform, one clip was exploding Lakshmi's closing line. The seeds you plant today will grow into forests tomorrow. But one comment under the post stood out. It was from someone. It's unexpected. Someone powerful, and what it said would shake the world again. The message from the White House saying, the soft blue glow of the backstage monitor. Sundar's eyes scanned the screen with disbelief. Beside him, Lakshmi leaned in, squinting slightly at the glowing text. Her image standing strong at the podium. Her green sari draped gracefully over her shoulder, eyes brimming with emotion, played on loop across major platforms. Social media feeds were flooding with shares, reactions, and messages from around the globe. But it wasn't the virality that struck them both still. It was the comment that had appeared beneath the video, gaining attention with lightning speed. It read, "This is the kind of leadership the world needs. Lakshmi Pichai, please consider addressing our next global summit on women and innovation." White House Advisory Council? Sundar froze. Lakshmi's breath caught in her chest. The message had come from an official, verified account, real, unmistakable, and global. Not a personal fan post, not a polite nod from distant followers, but a public request from the most powerful office in the world. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Sundar looked at his mother, the weight of pride and astonishment written all over his face. "Oma," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "the White House just invited you to speak." Lakshmi looked at him, stunned. "Me? But why me?" He shook his head with a soft laugh. "Because you said what the world needed to hear. Because you reminded people that humanity matters more than algorithms." News of the invitation spread. Like wildfire, reporters swarmed at the venue entrance. Headlines popped up on news portals faster than anyone could track. "Indian mother's speech moves the world. Modi ji's surprise guest steals the spotlight." From Chennai to the White House, Lakshmi Pichai's journey inspires millions. But inside the calm of their guest suite that evening, Lakshmi remained untouched. By the noise. She sat by the window, legs tucked beneath her, a warm shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The city lights sparkled in the distance, but her gaze was somewhere deeper, somewhere rooted in memory. Sundar brought her a warm cup of turmeric milk and placed it gently beside her. "How are you feeling?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Her fingers wrapped around the cup, absorbing the warmth. "I'm thinking of your father," she said finally. "How proud he would be. Rise beyond the stars." Sundar sat beside her, his eyes soft. "You made that happen, Amma, and the world is just beginning to see it." The next few days moved quickly. The Indian government formally congratulated Lakshmi for her speech, and arrangements were already being whispered about for her potential address in Washington. But even as the excitement swirled around her, Lakshmi stayed grounded. She spent her time writing letters, yes, handwritten letters to people who had reached out to her. Young girls from small towns, elderly women who saw their reflection in her story, even young men who said her words reminded them to call their mothers. Meanwhile, Sundar was navigating a different kind of pressure. A few corporate voices had started whispering about conflict. Why was the CEO of Google stepping back from panels so his mother could speak instead? Was this too emotional, too sentimental for the business world? In one high-level video call, a board member asked directly, "Are you sure this is the direction we want to associate with? It's powerful, yes, but it's not our brand." Sundar leaned forward and looked into the camera. "Our brand is built on innovation, and the foundation of innovation is empathy. If we lose that, we lose everything." His voice was calm but final. No one questioned him again. But just as things began to settle, another unexpected turn shook them once more. On a quiet afternoon, Lakshmi and Sundar returned to their home in Chennai for a short break before international travel. The lane was filled with neighbors, journalists, and well-wishers. Flower garlands hung from doorways, and children lined the street waving small flags inside. The old home still smelled of turmeric and sandalwood. Lakshmi walked room to room, touching the furniture, the walls, the old framed photo of her husband. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, from how far the journey had brought her. But the peace didn't last long. That evening, Sundar was reviewing schedules. A knock echoed through the front gate. An officer handed him a sealed folder marked confidential. Sundar opened it slowly. Inside was a report. Typed, stamped, a threat assessment. Lakshmi looked up as he read it. His face grew pale. "What is it?" she asked, setting aside her folded clothes. Sundar's voice was low. "They've identified the origin of the anonymous threat letter." And he looked at her, stunned. It came from within a major tech lobby. Not just any group. One we've collaborated with in the past? Lakshmi frowned. "Why would they try to stop me?" He hesitated. "Because your story makes them uncomfortable. Because it shifts attention from their power to your values." She sat down slowly. "I see. They're afraid the world will start valuing humanity more than products." The report also revealed surveillance data. Someone had tried to intercept the forum's footage and edit it before it aired globally. Luckily, the team caught it in time. "They didn't just want to stop you," Sundar said. "They wanted to erase you." Lakshmi closed her eyes, her fingers tightening around the armrest. But then she spoke, voice unwavering. "Then we speak louder. They contacted the organizers of the White House summit, confirmed attendance, but added a new condition. Lakshmi wanted to share the full story, including the attempts to silence her. Not out of revenge, but as a warning. Because if one simple voice could be targeted, then millions could be erased without ever being heard. The White House agreed, and so began preparations for her biggest speech yet. This time, she would not only represent her son or her country, but every silent woman who had ever been told she didn't belong on a stage. Meanwhile, back in Delhi, the media frenzy escalated. Political pundits debated the impact of her speech. Business analysts speculated whether Sundar's support of his mother would shift corporate culture. But beyond the noise, behind closed doors, another plot was brewing. The same lobby group, desperate to control the narrative, decided to act one last time. They filed a formal objection to her visa, claiming she was a non-essential political presence. A woman who had once been celebrated by leaders across the world, now being labeled as a threat to diplomacy. Sundar got the call at 2 a.m. He rushed into Lakshmi's room. He said, out of breath. She didn't flinch. "What now?" he asked quietly. He told her everything, and when he finished, Lakshmi stood slowly, walked to her small wooden cabinet, and opened a drawer. She pulled out the very first letter Sundar had ever written to her, scribbled in broken English when he was 10 years old. It read, "I want to make you proud, Amma. I will do big things." She held it up and said, "Then let's do big things together." The next morning they walked into the consulate office, not to beg, but to demand. And what happened in that office stunned every official in the room, because Sundar didn't walk in as a CEO. He walked in as her son, and the words he said would be remembered for generations. The son who stood up the air inside the American consulate in New Delhi was crisp, filtered, and heavy with bureaucratic tension. Men in suits shuffled between glass-walled rooms. Polite voices murmured over desks. The atmosphere carried a quiet, unspoken power, one that weighed heavier on those unfamiliar with its intricacies. Lakshmi Pichai stood near the entrance, wearing a simple sky-blue sari, her hands folded calmly in front of her. Beside her, Sundar Pichai's presence was unmistakable. Though he wore no badge, bore no title on his chest, every person in that building knew who he was. As they stepped through the corridor, a young official approached, visibly startled to see the global tech titan and his mother standing there, unannounced. "Mr. Pichai," he stammered, "we weren't informed you would be visiting personally." Sundar offered a tight but polite nod. "We're not here for a photo op," he said. "We're here because someone's trying to rewrite a narrative that doesn't belong to them." They were led to a private meeting room where 2 senior consular officials were waiting. Documents lay open across the table, including the formal objection letters submitted by a lobbying group in the USA, group that claimed Lakshmi Pichai's attendance at the global summit could be misconstrued as a political gesture, and detract from the focus on technical innovation. Sundar's eyes scanned the paper, his face unreadable. But his silence was not from uncertainty, it was from measured fury. This, he said finally, holding up the objection letter, is a fear response. The officials looked at each other, unsure whether to speak. Sundar continued, "For decades, we've believed that progress only comes from the brilliant, the technical, the powerful. And yes, they build the future, but they don't do it alone. Behind every engineer, every scientist, every innovator, there is someone who held them when they cried, who stood by them when they failed, who told them they were still enough. In my case, that person is my mother." His voice didn't rise. But it didn't need to. She doesn't threaten diplomacy, but she embodies it. She doesn't derail innovation, she explains its purpose. Lakshmi sat quietly as her son spoke. She didn't interrupt, didn't add to his words. But she watched him with eyes full of something deeper than pride. She saw her boy, again the same boy who once struggled with shyness, carried a second-hand backpack with broken zippers, who had once held her hand in fear at a school debate. Now here he was, speaking not for her, but because of her. Of the senior officials leaned forward, "Mr. Pichai, we understand your concern. But you must know these objections aren't policy, they're influence. There's pressure from high places." Sundar nodded. "Then let me make this very clear." He pulled a single envelope from his coat pocket and placed it on the table. "If my mother is denied entry," he said, "I will respectfully withdraw from all current advisory panels. I will decline my keynote at the upcoming Silicon Initiative. Furthermore, I will publicly support her right to speak, and I will make sure the world knows who tried to silence her." The room went silent, not because of the threat, but because of the clarity. Sundar didn't shout, didn't rage, but in those few sentences, he reminded them that some stands are not corporate, they're personal. "This isn't about me," he added. "This is about the kind of world we want to build. One where decency matters, where voices aren't filtered by influence." One of the officials swallowed hard. "We'll review this immediately." But Lakshmi finally spoke then, her voice calm, clear. "Don't review it because of him," she said. "Review it because somewhere in the world, a little girl is watching this moment and deciding whether her voice matters." They left the consulate in silence, but something had shifted. News of the visit leaked within hours. Social media exploded, with hashtags like hashtag let LAKSHMI speak and hashtag pichai is stand. Public figures joined in. Journalists revisited the original anonymous threat story. And within 2 days, the visa clearance came through, not quietly, but with a public apology from the embassy itself. As they boarded the flight to Washington, Sundar glanced at his mother across the aisle. She sat by the window, watching the clouds, her hands folded over her lap. She looked serene, but her mind was racing. "Are you nervous?" "Yes," softly. She turned and smiled. Not nervous. Just ready to plant more seeds. The White House Summit on Women and Innovation was held in a majestic hall lined with historic portraits. Chandeliers shimmered, rows of diplomats, leaders, thinkers, and students filled the space. The air buzzed not with tension, but with anticipation. Lakshmi's name appeared on the screen behind the podium, and the host announced her with reverence. "Today we are honored to welcome a woman whose words crossed borders and reminded us that behind every breakthrough is a beating heart. Please welcome Mrs. Lakshmi Pichai." She stepped onto the stage, not quickly, not with practiced elegance, but with quiet dignity. She wore a cream-colored sari, the edges embroidered with gold thread, and in her hand she carried a small notebook worn and soft. She didn't begin with statistics. She didn't begin with achievements. She began with a story. "When I was 10, she said I wanted to be a teacher, not because I wanted power, but because I wanted to understand the world. But life had other plans. My education stopped after high school. I married early. I became a mother. And I did what mothers do. I gave all I had." She looked around the room, locking eyes with students, politicians, and world leaders. "But I never gave up learning, not from books, but from people." Her words flowed like water, soft, clear, and unstoppable. She spoke of making ends meet, of feeding 2 children with 1 packet of rice, of teaching her boys the difference between being smart and being kind. She spoke of watching her son grow up and never imagining he'd run one of the world's largest companies, not because she didn't believe in him, but because her world had taught her to expect less. "I didn't raise a CEO," she said. "I raised a good man. Everything else is a bonus." Applause broke out, long and full. But then she did something unexpected. She opened her notebook. "I brought a few letters," she said. "From young people who wrote to me after my first speech." She read one from a girl in Kenya who had been told by her family that she would never speak on a stage. Now she was organizing her school's debate club. Another from a mother in Bangladesh, who cried alone at night because she felt invisible. But Lakshmi's story reminded her that invisibility didn't mean insignificance. And then one final letter from a 12-year-old boy in Ohio who said, "Your story made me want to treat my mom better. I told her I love her for the first time." Lakshmi closed her notebook. "This," she said, "is why I speak. Not to be seen, but to let others see themselves." The crowd rose, not just a standing ovation, a movement. And backstage, Sundar stood still, watching her. He didn't move, didn't cry, didn't even blink, because in that moment, he wasn't the center. He wasn't the headline. He was the son of a woman who had just changed the world. And as Lakshmi stepped down from the stage, one final message was handed to her, a short handwritten note from someone unexpected, someone she had never met in person, but who had been watching all along. She unfolded it slowly. The words inside would bring tears to her eyes and leave the entire summit stunned. The final letter. Lakshmi sat backstage, still absorbing the energy of the applause that had just shaken the White House Summit Hall. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the quiet weight of what had just occurred. She hadn't rehearsed her words to create waves, but they had. She hadn't set out to inspire a movement, but it had begun. And now, in her lap, rested a single folded note. Its paper was thick, the kind used for personal letters, not official memos.
There was no seal, just her name written in elegant cursive.
On the front, she opened it slowly, carefully, as if she already sensed that what was inside would change her forever. The note read, "Dear Mrs. Lakshmi Pichai, you do not know me personally, but I know of you. Watched your speech from this very room. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand what it means to lead when no one is watching. Your words reminded me of my own mother, the values she whispered into my ears while the world outside was shouting. You reminded me that we are not defined by what we achieve, but by who we are when no one is looking. Thank you for making me pause, for making me remember. Sincerely, Joseph R. Biden." Lakshmi stared at the letter for a long time, her eyes slowly glistening. Not from pride, not even from surprise, but from something deeper, a gentle validation that the quiet sacrifices of a lifetime had not gone unnoticed, not in her home, not in her country, and now, not even in the highest office of the United States. Sundar stepped into the room a moment later. The moment he saw her expression, he knew something had happened. He knelt beside her silently as she handed him the letter. As he read it, the corners of his mouth lifted into a slow, emotional smile. "He watched your speech," Sundar said. "The president himself." Lakshmi reached out and touched her son's hand. "No one is unseen," she whispered. "Psst, not even the ones who believe they are." The next day, photos of Lakshmi's speech and the personal letter from President Biden filled headlines around the world. A mother moves the White House. Lakshmi Pichai, the new voice of global empathy. President's private note goes viral, but back in Chennai, life slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. Lakshmi refused all sponsorships, declined all commercial offers, and politely stepped away from every media interview request. She wasn't chasing attention. She had only ever wanted to plant good seeds. She returned to her home, where her tulsi plant still waited for her water, where neighbors still called her Akka and Auntie with the same affection, and where the little postbox still filled with letters from children around the world. She made a habit of writing Bakich reply, handwritten, sealed with care. On Sundar's next visit to Chennai, he sat beside her on the veranda as she folded. Yet another letter to a young girl in Egypt who had asked how to stay confident when people laughed at her dreams. "What did you write?" Sundar asked. Lakshmi smiled as she sealed the envelope. "I told her that people will laugh when they see something they don't understand," she said. "And that's her sign she's onto something important." He leaned back, looking at her with admiration so full it could not be captured in photographs or titles. "You've changed the world, Amma," he said. She looked at him, her eyes calm. "No, Kenna. I only reminded it." Then she reached into her small wooden drawer and pulled out the very first notebook she'd given Sundar as a child, the same one she'd told him to use not only for ideas, but also for moments when he made someone smile. She placed it in his hands. "You stopped writing in it after you grew up," she said gently, "but maybe now it's time to start again." Sundar opened the cover. First page still had his childish handwriting. "Monday helped Amma with washing dishes." She smiled. His eyes welled with tears. "I remember that day." "Then write today's," she said softly. He smiled, pulled out a pen from his coat, and wrote, "Monday, Amma made the world cry and gave it hope." Months passed. Lakshmi's story became more than just a memory. It became a case study in schools, a discussion point in leadership panels, and a favorite example for diplomats trying to explain the power of quiet grace. But more than any of that, it became a legacy. She never returned to big stages again. She didn't need to, because her words had already taken root in places no microphone could reach in hearts. And one evening, she sat under the fading orange sky. A small girl from her neighborhood ran up to her barefoot and laughing, carrying a small paper in hand. "Auntie," she said breathlessly, "my teacher asked us who we wanted to be like when we grow up." Lakshmi smiled. "And what did you say?" The little girl grinned and held up the paper. Written in large letters were just 3 words, "Like Sundar's Amma." Lakshmi laughed a soft, full, joyous laugh that echoed across the courtyard, mingling with the rustling leaves and distant temple bells, because in the end, that was all she had ever wanted. Not recognition, not fame, but to live in a way that gave others permission to rise, to be the hand that steadied greatness before the world ever noticed it, to be the quiet behind the applause, and to plant seeds not for herself, but for a forest she may never see. But now she had seen it bloom, and it was beautiful.